All right, friends, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from a very, very hot city in the city of demons. That's right, you heard me correctly. City of demons. Some people call it City of Angels, which it used to be called, but I think it's more City of Demons now. La La Land, Hollywood, whatever you want to call it, folks. Hey, I'm always open for new names that you bring to us. Now, today is an astonishing, great guest, someone we've had on several months ago, almost a year, but not quite. And I've been trying to get him back, and we finally brought him back. He has so much knowledge, so much. And both, he is a ufologist as well as a ghost hunter. Now, I've always thought that the two are combined. And it doesn't just stop there with our guest. It goes much, much deeper than that, which you'll find out if you've already heard the previous interview I did with them, then you know exactly what we're going to be talking about, which is a lot of different things. But if you haven't and it's your first time, well then I want you all to welcome back the one and only Joshua P. Warren. Joshua, welcome back, brother.
Hey, thank you, Dr. J. It is wonderful to be back with you. And I tell you, our last conversation was just a cornucopia, a phantasmagoria of wild subjects. So who knows what we're going to dig into today.
And there's so much happening now. I know I meant to bring this up later, but because it's news, the storm Area 51. Okay, I don't think people are going to get shot and killed. I know for sure, I would think that the Air Force is starting to bring in, maybe the Nevada National Guard and then, other Air Force agents and maybe even hiring out more security. But I don't think people are going to get where they want. It's not going to happen. Yeah, it could be 1.7 or up to 2 million. I don't know what it is now that have said they wanted to go. I know Las Vegas, and you could probably confirm this for me or not, has actually sold out of rooms based around that weekend. And I know for a fact, being a rave promoter, producing raves back 20 years ago, that EDC, whenever that happens in Nevada at the Las Vegas Speedway, they are sold out from hotels everywhere around the time. But that is what we're seeing now. Now, out of 1.7 million, I don't know what it is now. Maybe you could give me an update of how many people are going versus how many people are interested. Even if it's a small percentage, let's say 10%, that's still a massive amount of people to show up at that base.
So, yeah, let me try to capture for you what it's like to actually be here as this is happening, because I am in Las Vegas. And furthermore, I own the Creepy Vegas Ghost and UFO show. So I'm on the cutting edge because everybody's coming to me and giving me updates, and the media is calling and wanting to know what happens. And I've been to Area 51. And for those who have never really studied what it's like to get there, basically you get in your car here with all the glitz and glamour and lights of the Vegas Strip, and you drive 2.5 miles north through nothing but sand and rocky hills. And I'm telling you, you don't have a cell phone signal. I remember I passed one sign that said next gas station 73 miles. And if you break down on the side of the road, and when it's 110 degrees, you're on your own, my friend. And so it's no fun task to get there. It's not like going to Disneyland. And so when you get to the area around Rachel, Nevada, which is the closest quote-unquote town, and I use the quotes every time I say that because I think the population is about 56 people. And you've got, a little diner there and some alien memorabilia. Other than that, you have this big, long dirt road that takes you up to the gate. Now, the gate is where you have, of course, the big signs that say warning, deadly force authorized, all that kind of stuff. And that's where people often go and pose and take their picture like they're at Disneyland. But you have to understand, this is an active, true, legitimate, classified military base every single day. Over 1,000 people who live in Las Vegas, they go to a secret section of the McCarran Airport called the Janet Airlines. They fly to Area 51 in the morning. They work there. They fly back about 6 o'clock in the afternoon or the evening. And the only way you can even identify those airlines is because the planes are white with a big red stripe down the side. So this is a real working facility. So that said, when you go to the gates of Area 51, if you were going to try to storm in there, to crush in there like people are saying, and sure enough, I know plenty of people who are going to do this. The rooms are sold out. That's all true. Here is what I believe would happen. If you went crushing through those gates, I don't think that they're going to do anything. I don't think they're going to shoot any tear gas. I don't think they're going to use any directed energy weapons, because once you pass that gate, you still have over 20 miles of extremely rugged, dangerous terrain. I'm talking cliffs, rattlesnakes, mountains, cactuses, all this stuff. Okay, so if you make it past that on foot, and that's because you're not going to be able to get a vehicle through there. You make it on foot that far. If you finally come down from the natural barricade of the mountains to the spot that we call the Groom Lake facility, or Area 51, what you're going to see are some runways and then some big, very solidly built, locked buildings. And if you were somehow able to get into those buildings, and I don't think you would be, then you would find a panel where you would have to enter a code for an elevator to take you way down underground, and that's where the actual facility is, underground. So the fact of the matter is, it's going to be fruitless. If you try, you're not going to make it there. The furthest you might get would be to the actual big buildings and the runways, and then at that point, the handful of people who actually make it that far, those are the ones who get arrested and dragged off. So I think, on the other hand, instead of this being something that will actually show us some new evidence, it's going to turn into a big party similar to the Burning Man Festival that happens every year here in Nevada, except this time it'll be on the outskirts of Rachel and some of those areas near the base. And it's entertaining. It gets the conversation going, but I don't think it's really going to do much to reveal anything.
Now, because you live in Nevada and you've been to the gate, which I also show the signs, the warning signs, military installation, do not enter. I believe it says lethal force can be used, etc. You've experienced an anomaly somewhere in the desert. Can you explain that anomaly in the Nevada desert, and how far from Area 51 and even Las Vegas is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, in early June, I was contacted by a Silicon Valley engineer named Ronald Heath, who created this new device called a differential time rate meter, which is capable of picking up an anomaly in the speed of time. So to help people understand this, Ronald Heath used to be a big fan of the X-Files TV show, and there is this episode where Mulder takes two stopwatches, he synchronizes them, he leaves one in his car, and he takes the other out into the woods to a UFO hotspot, and later he compares them and finds they're out of sync. So the implication is that some technology that was surrounding that UFO left kind of a scar in space-time at that spot. And so this is what you can sort of reproduce using the DT meter, because it has a little display unit, and then it has a sensor, and they're connected by a 100-foot cable. And you go to a place, and you measure these 2 points, and there should not be any time difference between those 2 points over 100 feet here on Earth, unless something huge happens, like a black hole is approaching or something crazy. That should not exist. Ronald Heath had been running 2 of these at his property there in California for 2 months, logging 24 hours a day, never got an anomaly. But he sent me one of these to be the first field investigator to go use it. And I decided, well, I have seen Bob Lazar talk about working on these engines that distort space-time and gravity at Area 51. So it seemed logical to me, well, why don't I take a trip to Area 51, get as close as I can to the base, and take measurements to see, if they're working on some technology like that in this huge facility, maybe I'll get a little ripple of some kind of weird space-time manipulation outside. So my wife, Lauren, and I, we got into our SUV. We decided we would spend the night at a little town midway, and the idea was, as I went to Area 51 and back, I would stop approximately every 20 miles and take a measurement as a control. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if everything's normal, and then we get to Area 51, boom, we have this anomaly, and then we leave and it's normal, normal, normal. That's what I kind of hoped would happen. Well, it turns out that's not what happened. When I was around Area 51, everything was very normal. As a matter of fact, it was eerily peaceful and quiet because that's restricted airspace. And when you're standing there on a mountain, sort of overlooking that area, and it's midnight and it's dark and there are no airplanes, you don't hear any traffic. It's so quiet you can literally hear the blood rushing through your veins. That's how peaceful it was. We had third generation night vision. We didn't see anything. However, much to my surprise, on the way there, about 25 to 30 minutes drive north of Las Vegas on Route 93, at this one little nondescript sort of wide spot on the side of the road, I was able to get a measurement of time slowing down 25 microseconds per second. Now, what that means is that if you took a second and you split it into 100,000 pieces, 25 of those pieces slow down for a moment. And that's not supposed to happen. Now, I showed this data to Ronald Heath, and he was astounded and ecstatic, couldn't believe it. Well, here's what really shocked me. When I found out after this that little spot on the side of the road just so happens to be one of the biggest UFO hotspots in the whole country, where astounding footage of UFOs has been seen, where one man named Sean Kevin Jason even had a full-blown close encounter there that lasted 10 minutes with a huge triangular craft overhead. I even went to the site with him, and on camera, he verified that that was the site where this happened. And I started connecting the dots saying, all right, this is not at Area 51, but it's on the way to Area 51. It's all part of what they call the Nellis Air Range, and where they're doing testing and dropping various weapons and so that in and of itself showed me that the fact I got this anomaly at a place that I wasn't expecting to get it, which later turned out to be a paranormal hotspot, means there may be something significant happening in that area. And once this went public, of course, I started getting contacted by media all over, and so that's still something that I'm investigating.
Now, let's take this back to Einstein, right? When he was working on the theory of relativity and other things, trying to unify, all theories, right? The unified field theory. The thing is even then, 100 years ago, Einstein theorized that if you had something that gravity, essentially at the time he didn't even consider the option that there was a way for us to create gravity, but a large mass, a planet, etc., would clearly affect the time-space continuum, the fabric of space-time. So the inference I'm getting is the closer that you were getting to Area 51 and you saw these anomalies of time, I'm wondering if it's because of the gravity experiments they're doing there.
Well, it could very well be. And in fact, here's something that I think will give us even more insight. I have a little timeline of events here, and since I talked to you last, the timeline has become even more interesting. So let me just go over this very quickly. December of 2017, the New York Times broke the story about the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP. Then in early June of 2018, NASA announced that there were, quote, complex organic materials found on Mars, end quote. Then June 18th of 2018, that's when I documented the time warp. And that same night, President Trump announced the creation of a Space Force. On July 25th of 2018, NASA announced that there is an underground lake on Mars. Also on that same date, July 25th of 2018, George Knapp released this letter, which I'm sure we'll get to again, that Senator Harry Reid wrote about the exotic technologies that were being back engineered in the ATIP program. And then in August of 2018, mainstream media announced that in June of 2018, which is when I got my reading, just so happens the Air Force had dropped a new type of Earth-penetrating nuclear gravity bomb from a B-2 at Nellis Air Force Base, more or less right beside the time warp location, which could be an explanation for them, whether it's actually a B-2 bomb or whatever, an explanation for some kind of technological experiment happening that may have contributed to what I picked up. But furthermore, now we get to May of 2019. NASA launches its ad campaign with a video narrated by William Shatner proclaiming that we're putting humans back on the moon by 2024 and then heading to Mars. And then in June of 2019, mainstream media announced the U.S. Senate had been briefed on UFOs encountered by the U.S. military and incidents such as the USS Nimitz encounter. So, the reason I read you this timeline is you can see, in retrospect, there are a series of different developments that are very quickly happening, and that means something has been discovered here. And, we were talking a little bit off air about the fact that with the U.S. government has the Department of Defense. It's not the Department of Investigating Weird Shit. It's the Department of Defense. So what that means is if they're going to get funding to channel into some kind of a project, you need to put some kind of a military angle on it. So I have no doubt that there are technological discoveries that have been made, exotic technology, as Harry Reid pointed out in his astounding letter. And then those technologies could be used for all kinds of wonderful purposes that could probably free us from the stranglehold corporations have put on us to get resources. But unfortunately, given the way human nature works, a lot of it's being turned into weaponry. And I think that that's certainly what's happening at Area 51, and that's probably part of why I got this time anomaly, because they're making weapons that will influence space and time.
Now, there's a super chat question here for you. Let me go back to it. This is from Paper Crane Wishes. I want to thank you, Paper Crane. She says, thank you for the compliment, Paper Crane, by the way. The question for you is, what do you think about CE5? Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind.
Well, I definitely feel that there is some legitimacy to that. As a matter of fact, Dr. Stephen Greer, he grew up around Asheville, North Carolina, which is where I'm from. I have a laboratory there. I have a museum there. I own the Haunted Asheville Ghost Tours, so I get a lot of interesting information from Asheville. And, Stephen Greer, he has done a lot to promote this idea that you can go out into the field and that you can sort of attract these beings and have them come and interact with you in some form. And one of the techniques that he teaches is this mantra, and it goes sort of like this. You sit there, you clear your mind, and you go, I'm na ma, I'm na ma, I'm na ma. Now, honestly, I don't remember exactly why he thinks that mantra works so well, but he goes out with groups of people, they meditate, they use this mantra. I know they've done flashing of lights, and they claim they have had these things appear in many, many different ways and interact. And he says it's always been a peaceful thing. Nobody gets taken off and probed or anything like that. So I had been in the field a number of times myself, and I've tried that. And so far, I haven't had any luck with it. But I have a daily podcast that I do called Joshua P. Warren Daily, and I put this out there. And I said, try it out and see if it works for you. And I got dozens of emails from people who said that they did this and that they had at least a UFO appear, and in some cases they actually saw a being. So I would recommend that we take the vast audience here that listens to Dr. J and ask the audience to try it out. And let's see if you go out and you just sit there for an hour on a quiet night somewhere in a private place and go, maybe you can create your own CE5 experience.
I'm very with you there, and clearly, I read, do you know Preston Dennett well?
I might have met him, but I wouldn't say I know him well.
I guess I'm fortunate because he lives literally a stone's throw away. And what Preston Dennett said, the true origins of CE5, go back, I believe, to the 80s. And what it was NBC was throwing a party, maybe a rap party or something to celebrate the network in downtown, in Hollywood, essentially. What they did is they set up their famous peacock lights. And what happened is because these weird lights that were not normally shown before, ended up attracting two, not one, but two craft that seemed very, very interested. They approached very slowly. They came down, and then once they realized it was terrestrial, they took off. That is where the idea first came to start using lights, and then of course consciousness and everything else came into that factor.
Well, when I go out, I blink infrared lights that are only visible in the infrared realm, so you don't see anything with your naked eye. But if you have night vision, it's a big bright spotlight. I have regular floodlights. I've used UV lights. I've tried that. Plus, I am known as being a technological geek. I have a warehouse with just about every piece of equipment in it you can imagine. I just finished shooting a program on the Travel Channel, actually, where I debuted this new invention called the opticalizer. And the opticalizer could be a game changer. This is something created by my team and myself because basically it's a set of binoculars, or you can hook it to a telescope that has a wire that connects to a photoreceptor and turns the light that comes in into a sound and a waveform. And then that is fed into a computer where you can actually see the waveform. So I've gone out and I've created a database. Well, here is the waveform of a flashlight. Here's the waveform of an airplane, waveform of a headlight, waveform of a laser, etc. Because all these different types of light have their own unique signatures. And so I compare whatever comes in to that database. And so I was using that at Brown Mountain, where we have, of course, the Brown Mountain Lights phenomenon, and got some really interesting results there. But I take this out into the field now, and we have so many weird things flying around out there with drones, not to mention here in Las Vegas. My God, you've got, huge lights all over the place, maybe the brightest city in the world. And so it helps me a lot to be able to point this device and similar devices out there and tell the difference between something that's normal and something that's abnormal. And I tell you all this because I use techniques that are both sort of old-fashioned. My friend Darren Evans, he'll take out Ouija boards and he'll try to do summonings with them. And I'm sitting here using every gadget I've got and high-speed cameras and all. And I still cannot tell you that I have created any reliable way to attract these things. And so I feel like that maybe they exist more often around us than we realize, but they're just slightly out of our usual range of perception. But I find it pretty amazing when you hear there are groups of people out there who claim they can do this consistently. But, we're trying. I'm trying.
Well, let me say two things about, being consistent and the perception. First of all, now, as opposed to 35, almost 40 years ago, consciousness has become a huge play as far as CE5. And the other point I want to make is that if you don't know something, think of late 1400s, when Columbus came here to the new land, the Newfoundland, and sound. I'm not speaking of, by the way, Newfoundland in Canada. I'm talking about the new land, America. And I believe he landed somewhere in the Bahamas. Correct me if I'm wrong or not.
Columbus, yeah. Well, he ended up in the Bahamas, and then he ended up discovering Puerto Rico and that area as well. Mm-hmm.
The point is the local indigenous people really had never seen ships like that before. And when their perception is so off of what could be possible, some of them don't even remember seeing the ships because they were so massive and looked so different.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny. Right now I'm preparing some content for a project, and similar things happened supposedly when Captain James Cook, approached Hawaii and was seen for the first time by large groups of people. They were in the middle of a festival to celebrate this god named Lono. And it turns out that when they saw these ships and the mast and the sails and the rigging, which are all things they'd never really seen like that, it just so happened to look a lot like some of the artifacts that they would use in their celebrations. And so, furthermore, Captain Cook was circling the island in a clockwise fashion, and they would have these processions where they would walk around the island in a clockwise fashion as part of the festival. So when Cook finally came ashore, apparently he was deified. A lot of people thought this was some person who was the incarnation of the god Lono. And so you can see why in other cases that the sight of some type of European and full garb with the ships and all that would be so outside the realm of experience that you might not even exactly comprehend what you're looking at. And that's why we humans have a tendency to want to interpret these UFOs according to some technology that we're familiar with. We try to compare it to something that has wings or a rotor or a jet or something like that. But I think that probably many of these things are so beyond what we are able to relate to that they almost do transcend the boundary between organic and inorganic, that we're talking about something that's almost like a combination of both of those things, that has consciousness, that has some intelligence, but also has a mechanical aspect to it. And that's one of the things that I did find in Puerto Rico. And I did a little documentary about this on YouTube called UFOs, a new discovery, where I point out why I believe that these are technologies that go way beyond what we can really fully recognize at this point in our evolution.
First, let me give a shout out to Justin T. Again, thank you so much for your great comment and your super chat. And let me tell you about Hawaii. I was there with the Cousins brothers, Third Phase of Moon, and I got a crash course into learning about, the history. And what it was is King Kamehameha, the ruler, the one who unified all the islands together, was prophesized. And he was born on apparently the time that James Cook, I don't know how it fit into the time he was born, but the point is just like you said, the symbol that they had always, for some reason, I don't know where they got it from, that was what was on the masts. And that's why they thought, oh, crap, or not crap in a bad way, but in a good way. Hey, look, the gods are finally answering us. We are being, the chosen one is finally coming to us. Sadly, at the very end, King Kamehameha ended up killing him because apparently if anyone turns their back on a ruler, it's a huge disrespect. And from what I found out from the locals too, and Blake and Brent Cousins, is that King Kamehameha did in fact cut off James Cook's arm and used it as a fly swatter.
Wow. Well, I know that I've read that they baked him and they took all of his flesh off, and then they produced various I don't know if you call them ritualistic items or whatever with his bones, but it was a pretty ghoulish thing he endured there, so to speak.
Cannibalism, I think, was very rampant there during those days.
Well, and also, none of us really knows exactly how a lot of these islanders were living because they didn't keep records the same way that the Europeans did. I know in Puerto Rico, for example, when Columbus encountered the Taínos, and I think that was on his second voyage in 1493, he said that the Taínos were actually very nice people, that they were welcoming people, and that they had a good sense of humor. I mean, he had positive things to say about them. It's a terrible thing that eventually that turned to the point where they were being tortured by the Spaniards if they couldn't go out and extract a certain amount of resources per day and bring it back, and then eventually they got enslaved. But my point is, there were some stories early on that are considered as factual as you're going to get about these chiefs who would encounter these Spaniards wearing these big metal chest plates and whatnot and have the big feather, and wondered if these guys actually were immortal. And there was one account where a chief and several of his men got one of these Spaniards and they drowned him. They held him under the edge of the water there until he was dead. And then they sat there and watched his body for days to see if it would come back to life. It was an experiment. And so, we grew up in a world where that sounds almost unbelievable to us, but you have to realize, we grew up in a world where we knew what the Earth looks like from outer space. We realized this is a big blue ball with a bunch of different rocky surfaces on it, and you have people who live here and people who live there. But if you didn't know all of that, and you'd heard these stories about, gods and deities and spirits, and you see another creature that, it may be a human, but this human might look so different that you're not even sure if this is a human necessarily, especially when they have all their garb and accessories and weapons, then it gives you some insight into how that we might treat aliens, quote-unquote aliens, if they came here, and probably why that if aliens are peaceful, and they must be, because if not, they could have wiped us out easily already.
Super easy. And one thing I always argue is the easiest way is just release a virus that we're not immune to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are many ways, but you're exactly right. It reminds me of War of the Worlds, where, in the end, it's a virus that kills the aliens. And so they haven't destroyed us, so they must not have some terrible intent. Or if they do, they're on a time scale that, it doesn't relate directly to anything we can control. And so, therefore, we might think, well, maybe they are actually more benevolent than we are, which is why they were able to evolve so far without destroying themselves. I don't know if humanity will be able to do that. And so it could be that they say, let's just watch these apes down here, these humans from the sky, and there's no need to go down and interact with them because we don't know what kind of crazy stuff they're going to do.
That's very true. And you know what? And you're absolutely right. The knowledge we have is so limited, and we can't assume that every life form out there is benevolent. There clearly has to be malevolent beings as well. I mean, that's the universal thing: good versus evil, etc. Why do we think that only exists here on Earth and not above us?
Well, sure, and in fact, Jim Mars, he was a good friend of mine, and obviously he passed away recently. Yeah, very sad. My wife and I had the great pleasure of being a guest at his and his wife's home there, just probably about a year before he died down there in Texas, and that was one of my best memories. But Jim, he took me into his library there in his office, and it was really vast. And he was going through a lot of his files and showing me some of the more obscure things. And he was talking about the Aurora, Texas crash that happened in the late 1800s.
1896, yes.
Yeah, and he actually lived right down the road. We got into his car, and we went over to Aurora, and we went out to the graveyard, and he showed me the grave where this alien may still be, and we took our picture there. But anyway, one of the things he was pointing out is that in the accounts of this thing that crashed, before it crashed, there were good old boys outside shooting at it with their guns.
Yes.
And you think, why would you do that? I mean, if you don't even know what this thing is, why would you go out and shoot at it? And then you say, well, hell, why do people go out and shoot, any nice, majestic creature? Why do you go shoot some kind of big bear or some, elephant or whatever? I don't know. But so I'm sure that you're going to have people out there, no matter what culture you're dealing with, who have that kind of an attitude. And it may be that the people who have these scary experiences with aliens, where they come down and they are, they're the ones who are taken and sort of enslaved and probed and all that kind of stuff. They may just be people who came into contact with some of the more ruthless ones that are out there. But I think that most of them must not have a desire to wipe out humanity, because we keep growing, we keep getting bigger, we keep advancing, and who knows how all this is going to turn out.
Amen. And you know what? That's one thing that especially during the Orson Welles broadcast of War of the Worlds, and knowing society in general. If you've been to LA, I know that. Have you ever lived in LA?
No, I haven't lived there. I've only visited for long periods of time.
Well, I'm sure you've seen the violence, how easily it breaks out, and how guns are introduced into the fight so easily. I mean, if I counted, if I had $1 for every bullet that was fired at me intending on killing me, and I did nothing wrong, I think it was purely misidentification. Me and you and your wife, we'd be having lobster dinner, drinks, and I mean, you name it. I mean, we're talking over 200 bullets at that point. The point is, that's just me. What about every day you see on the news? We have so many people that are shot and killed. And who's to say that these people, out of fear, would see something or a mass of UFOs coming down, and what are they going to do? They're going to start shooting at them because of fear. That's the way they've been instilled.
It's funny. Just last night, right down the road here from my place in Vegas, guy got gunned down in a road rage deal. It was just a couple of people visiting from California, tourists. And I don't know what happened, if they honked their horn at the wrong person or whatever, but bang, 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 person's dead. So yeah, it doesn't take a lot to set people off. And I have no doubt that if UFOs started showing up, there would be people who would start, if it's one thing to pull out your revolver and start firing at it, but it's probably more likely that some of these governments would start firing missiles at it, I mean, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, maybe I'm being naive, and we're giving them the benefit of the doubt too much. It reminds me of that Twilight Zone episode, To Serve Man, where the aliens come down and they say, "Oh, we're here to be, to help you and have a peaceful, loving relationship." And they have this book, the handbook called To Serve Man. And then you find out at the end that To Serve Man is a cookbook. That's what that means, how to serve man. And so, that's the twist. But nonetheless, again, even if I'm being naive, it doesn't do any point to try to be aggressive towards something that literally has more power than you do. What good is that going to do? So we have a chance at having a peaceful relationship with them if we don't piss them off. But if they come here and we just, start freaking out and looking at them as a threat, well, then we have a big problem. And of course, you can imagine every single person in charge of a government on this planet would be just crestfallen to think that some higher power has come in and that now all the attention is going to move away from our human leaders to what are these guys going to do? And so the governments have an interest in keeping us sort of brainwashed into them having the power and would hate the idea of being deflected onto some other greater mysterious thing.
Now, let me go back to what I originally intended on starting with. This is something that you said about 9 months ago, around that time when I had you on last, and I told you before we came back, that before we started that, I intended on bringing you back much sooner than that. And I really wish I wasn't out of town that weekend you were here for your your demonstration, your event about the wishing machine. But the document that you uncovered, which is on your website, about Harry Reid. Can you just give the down low for all those people who have not heard that interview?
I tell you, this is, to me, this is one of the most astounding documents ever. And this was actually leaked, if you will, by George Knapp. And I want to point out that Senator Harry Reid, who was the chief political figure behind ATIP, he was the Senate Majority Leader from the state of Nevada. And the most significant contracts that were given to work on this were given to Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace here in Nevada. And a lot of what has reached the public is information that comes from George Knapp, who is an investigative reporter here in Nevada.
Yeah, KLAS, right?
Yeah, and I want to point so Nevada is playing a big role in all this. And before I get into this letter, I just want to also point out here that in 2017, Robert Bigelow, he sat down and was interviewed on 60 Minutes by Laura Logan. She asked him, "Do you believe in aliens?" He said, quote, "I'm absolutely convinced that's all there is to it." She said, "Do you also believe that UFOs have come to Earth?" And he replied, quote, "There has been and is an existing presence, an ET presence," end quote. She asked, "Do you imagine that in our space travels we will encounter other forms of intelligent life?" He said, quote, "You don't have to go anywhere." She said, "You can find it here?" "Yeah," he insisted. "Where exactly?" she said. "It's right under people's noses," he replied. So that, just think of that, because this is the guy who was contracted by the government. So Senator Harry Reid wrote this letter, and of course you have to understand, Senator Harry Reid, he's an old man now with pancreatic cancer, and he is, he realizes at this point he could be talking about whatever he wants, and yet he has appeared numerous times on local television here in Las Vegas saying, "We need to let the American people know, that there's something going on here. They deserve to know." Here is what he wrote in this letter dated June 24th of 2009. This is on official United States Senate letterhead. And this letter was sent to the Deputy Secretary of Defense there. And he says, and I'm just going to read a few exact passages here. "Since the ATIP program and study were first commissioned, much progress has been made with the identification of several highly sensitive, unconventional aerospace-related findings." He goes on to say, "Given the likelihood that these technologies will be applied to future systems involving spaceflight, weapons, communications, and propulsion, the standard management and safeguarding procedures for classified information are not sufficient." Okay, so what he's doing there is he's saying we need even more security than we usually have for this one. He goes on to say, "Associated exotic technologies likely involve extremely sophisticated concepts within the world of quantum mechanics, nuclear science, electromagnetic theory, gravitics, and thermodynamics. Given that all of these have the potential to be used with catastrophic effects by adversaries, an unusually high degree of operational security and read-on discretion is required." Now, let me point out some things here for all of you. He says this is something that, we have discovered. Like, he didn't say we manufactured this, we made this. He says it's exotic, and it can affect all these realms of science. And he says it'd be catastrophic if our adversaries got it. So what he's saying is we didn't make it, and nobody else made it.
No China, no Russia, and none of those other countries, North Korea. That's what he's saying, right? They didn't make it.
So if you get something that's exotic, that requires new security, that can affect all this stuff, quantum mechanics, nuclear science, electromagnetic theory, gravitic. Well, what is he talking about? He's obviously talking about the alien technology, and as if that weren't enough. If you still read that and you go, well, I don't know, possibly he's still not exactly talking about things related to space. Well, there was also a list of studies released that accompanied the paper that had 38 different topics. The paper includes the name of the scientist conducting the study and his or her institution. I won't give out the names of the institutions, but I will give you some of the topics. These are just some of them. Wormholes in space-time, invisibility cloaking, anti-gravity studies, warp drives, dark energy and dimensions, brain-machine interfaces, quantum entanglement communication, ultracapacitors and energy and power storage devices, advanced space propulsion based on vacuum, biomaterials, programmable matter, and of course there is my personal favorite, number 38, which is redacted. Now, so after so many mind-boggling subjects, what on earth might be the one somebody decided to black out? So now this is, okay, now, so again, let's look at this in context. We have this guy who was the Senate Majority Leader who put all this together. He's from Nevada. He got Robert Bigelow the contracts to back engineer this stuff in Nevada. George Knapp has been releasing this stuff here in Nevada. You get Robert Bigelow on TV saying, yes, it's here. I have no doubt. It's under your nose. You don't even have to go to space. You got Senator Harry Reid now coming on television practically on his deathbed telling everybody, we need to release this. We need folks to understand more about what's going on. You hear the words in his letter, which has been completely authenticated and acknowledged as being true. You hear these subjects that are being studied. What more do you need? I mean, like if the president, if Donald Trump got up in front of a podium today and said, folks, listen, they're here. We're not alone. There's life out there. Would that really mean so much to people? It seems like everything that he says, people fight over it anyway. What is it going to take for you to believe? Like how many politicians need to come out and tell you in certain ways that this is real before you understand they've got this stuff? And here's the thing that gets me, Dr. J. I got to be honest with you. I was born in this country. I love my country. I pay my taxes. I understand there are certain things that need to be kept secret for our security. But if there are aliens flying around out there, and they are using these technologies that could change everything, I think maybe we kind of draw the line like, you need to tell us about it at that point. Don't you agree?
Oh, very well. So, I mean, that's what Freedom of Information Act is there for us to know where our tax dollars are being spent. But here's the thing, Mr. Warren, that I truly think has happened, especially since those days of Bob Lazar, even before that. He mentioned that there was no insignia on the uniforms of the guards, which indicated that they were private military contractors. What better way to circumvent the U.S. Constitution and all the laws where they have to, for instance, the General Accounting Office, right? If they are in private corporations, they don't have to show a shit. And that's, in a bad way, a horrible thing for humanity. But I truly think the reason why they're not showing us this is not because we're not ready. Even if we found out we were just a giant alien ant farm, I still think people can handle that. I think it all comes down to weapons.
Well, you're right about that. And also we have to consider it was, of course, Eisenhower, champion of World War II, who warned us about the military-industrial complex. And that's what you're talking about here, this idea that we can circumvent the rights that are granted to the public within a government if we have this contracting protocol here that allows us to hand things over to private groups like, Blackwater Security and places like that they're not accountable in the same way that an elected official or an appointed official is. And I understand how that in World War II, Hitler, he almost took over the world. I mean, if Hitler had put more resources in developing the atomic bomb and gotten there before we did, then he probably would have. And, my whole life, I have always been a fan of, I hang out with elderly people and I love to hear their stories and I learn from them. And I've talked to a lot of people, and many of them now are dying finally, but people who fought in World War II like my grandfather did, and they tell me, in World War II, we were scared to death here in the United States. They thought, at any moment, the Nazis could come paratrooping in here and take this country over because that's what they wanted to do. So the people in this country were so scared during World War II that when we finally won the war, then they saw, boy, if you get any kind of technology out of American control, then this could end up being, we could end up being a slave colony, basically. And that's why they were so protective of nuclear secrets for a while, killing people like the Rosenbergs and whatnot. And so that sort of mindset still persists to this day. We still have World War II veterans alive who remember that fear. We just recently lost President George H.W. Bush, who was the youngest fighter pilot, of the time. And so I think that we're going to have to respect and appreciate the fact that I believe the people who are keeping this information secret, they really are trying to protect us. I think that most of them have our best interest in mind. That's why I don't support the idea of going to Area 51 and trying to badger those people. But I also realize that there is that balance that we've had to consider from day one in this country between security and freedom, and who gets to control what, and all, I mean, it's a tricky subject. It always will be. It borders on philosophy, and there are a lot of forces involved. So that's why I don't think if the government came out in any form and just stopped trying to hide this stuff, that we would be necessarily pissed at the government. We would say, we understand why you were doing that, but this is something that cannot be kept a secret forever. Eventually there's going to be one of those Edward Snowden type guys who is going to come out and he's going to blast something. So I'd rather them go ahead and do a proper job of telling us as much as they can about it. They don't have to give us the whole shebang. Don't have to tell us exactly how all the nuts and bolts work, and they probably don't even know how they all work. But I think it would be nice for them to at least acknowledge that we are not alone and take some credit for human nature sort of evolving into a more enlightened position.
I was just talking about this to somebody. I believe it's Costa something. He runs his own SyFy from Northern California. Anyhow, and I was mentioning to him that we truly are ready for this, this to happen, for us to know that we have brothers and sisters. It's not 100 years ago or 90 years ago with the Orson Welles broadcast. People are definitely ready. At the same token, I'm sure the things that are going on S4, of course, they are, according to Bob Lazar, everything was for a military application, which is one of the reasons why it's being kept hidden from us. But at the same time, I don't think people want to break free of their comfortable lives, going to work, playing in the stock market, whatever they do in their free time, and then, eating dinner with their family, going to sleep, and repeating maybe some baseball, football, whatever on the weekends. If this was to be announced, it would totally change our game. And in my eyes, when the DoD released those 3 videos, that to me was disclosure. That's as close as we're going to get. What's Trump going to say? Oh, hey, just so you know, we've had 9 craft that we've held at S4, more at other bases. By the way, one of them, according to Bob Lazar, was found in an archaeological dig. It's ancient. They've been visiting us for thousands, if not millions, if not a billion plus years, and terraformed Earth for us. And by the way, who's on Big Brother, or who's going to be evicted on Big Brother tomorrow, or who's winning American Idol? What the hell would he say? That's why I think it's never going to happen. Not to mention, I think after Eisenhower, there really weren't very many presidents that knew. George Herbert Walker Bush had an inkling, if not, he knew because he was the head of the CIA. But most people, when they're president, they are there for a temporary time. They are a guest. They're not lifelong career agents in the DIA and any of those alphabet soup agencies.
Well, that's a very good point because, I was just talking to my wife the other day about the fact that there are only, 5 presidents in the history of our country who attained the office of the president without being elected to anything. And of those, the only one who wasn't a member of the military or worked in the government is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the only president who has not ever been appointed to some political position or elected to some position or served in the military. So therefore, he is probably the most disconnected from that sort of deep state level of bureaucracy and some of the secrets that have been kept for a long time. And yet, the funny thing is we live now in the most open information age. And so how all that is going to pan out and sort of, filter its way to his office is kind of a question, but or a big question mark. But the interesting thing, going back to the point you're making here, is that it almost seems like that the way that they have disclosed this information is for those of us who are curious and intelligent enough to get it. So, in other words, they don't put out a big press release saying, hey, all you dummies out there who think that we're alone, it's not true anymore. They don't. Instead, it's almost like the information with the videos, with Senator Reid's letter coming out, with Senator Reid going on TV, with Robert Bigelow going on TV. It's almost like they are confirming for those of us who care that we're right. And so I feel like the disclosure has happened, but I guess everybody has their different idea of exactly what that is supposed to look like. So I guess that kind of goes to what you're saying there, Dr. J, and it's an amazing time to be alive.
Oh, super amazing. And Stan Friedman said this about his grandchildren, that the time they're living in, and if only nobody can predict the future. I mean, at least we don't have the technology to do so. And not to mention, it can be changed in so many ways so easily, right? You can create, if the future is a river, and you do something that creates another stream that breaks off, that would create for multiple timelines. But Stan Friedman did say for his grandchildren that are alive today, this is the most exciting time because we are not only getting a sensory overload of everything, there is so much more positive talk about ETs than we've ever had in the history of humanity. Well, I can't say the history of humanity, at least 120, 150 years, because you know what? 300, 500, 1,000 years ago, it seemed like they were very, very open to discussing what they considered gods coming from up above.
Well, that's exactly right. And so it goes back to how we were saying that certain, people and tribes on islands would have interpreted these visitors from these other foreign lands in some pretty extreme ways. And so, I feel like that a lot of what we have heard about the timeline of UFO crashes and UFO debris retrieval is probably pretty accurate. And it's probably been going on for a long, long time, but it's the Area 51 thing, I believe, has a direct connection to what happened at Roswell, New Mexico. And, even though that Roswell story has been beaten into the ground, a lot of people still don't realize that, World War II ended in 1945, and the aviators who flew the Enola Gay and dropped the atomic bombs were based there at the Roswell airfield base. So you had the best aviators in the world, and they were also playing an integral role in the dropping of the atomic weapons. And then right after that, in 1947, we have this thing that crashes right there outside of that Roswell base.
Or two things, possibly, according to Stan Friedman.
Yeah, possibly. And then I think something like 18 days after that, President Truman signed the National Security Act, which formed the Air Force, the CIA, what became the NSA, and the position of the Secretary of Defense. And the very first Secretary of Defense, a man named Forrestal, he ended up taking fall out of a window.
Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people say it was a suicide because he was depressed, and that's why he was entered into Walter Reed. But looking at it, it clearly seems that somebody could have pushed him out because of what he knew.
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. If you're going to play off something as a suicide, you have to come up with a reason why it's a suicide. So, it's one thing to look at the story behind all that, like, well, here's what happened. A thing crashed, and they went out and they did an autopsy. But if you look at what we do know for a fact, that Roswell was associated with the ending of the war and atomic power. The crash happened there, and then all of a sudden the government rearranged itself immediately. I think that right around that time, we're talking about the early 50s, the government, they needed to establish a base where they could take the Roswell crash in particular, and maybe other things, but really focus on, well, back engineering them. And so that's when they started developing Groom Lake out here in Nevada, which has become what we now call Area 51. I believe that's how it was designated on a map back in those days, as Area 51. Now it has a
Well,
lot of different names.
even before that, wasn't the airport something like Homey or Holmesy? Maybe you could confirm the name of it. It began with an
Yeah,
H and it ended with a
Homey.
Y. Homey, okay,
Yeah.
Homey Airfield. And I know that, say, if any pilot, Cessna, whatever, is flying near there, the call sign for the area is Dreamland.
Yeah, the tower identifies itself as Dreamland. Yeah, that's right. So and then so you've got Groom Lake or Homey, and then within it you have a spot that they call Area 51, and then according to Bob Lazar, you have this other little section called S4. And so, but who knows about all that? People, of course, have just sort of latched on to the term Area 51, but to be honest with you, nobody officially knows the name of the facility. Nobody even knows officially what Janet Airline stands for. The joke is it stands for just another non-existent airline or terminal. That's it. Yeah, just another non-existent terminal. So you have these things that we all kind of know about, but they're still not officially acknowledged. And here's something else that your listeners might find interesting. You know, when the media starts talking about Area 51, the mainstream media frequently says that it was first acknowledged by the government in 2013, but actually, that's not true. And by the way, the government owns more of Nevada than any other state in the United States, 86%. So there is a much earlier document that refers to Area 51. In 2001, John Greenwald, of course, of the Black Vault.
Great friend of mine. He actually lives down the street from me, Northridge.
Oh, is that okay? Well, yeah, he's a great guy. I got to hang out with him last year for a while as well, and we stayed up late at a casino and had a lot of interesting conversations here in Vegas. But he got this letter. It was a FOIA response from the Department of Energy in 2001, and I'm going to read you, and this is a quote here from that letter. It stated, quote, "The 38,400-acre land area once known as Area 51 was withdrawn from public use by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, a predecessor to the U.S. Department of Energy, more than 35 years ago, under Public Land Order 1662, which was filed in 1958. I know that sounds boring, but just give me a second. Since that time, the parcel has been used and administered as a national asset. Because DOE is not now active there, Area 51 no longer appears on maps of DOE's Nevada test site. Today, that land area is used by the Department of Defense as part of its 4,120 square mile Nellis Air Force Range. For national and for safety and national security reasons, airspace above the Nellis Range and the NTS is closed to commercial aviation and the general public, end quote. So this was acknowledged in 2001, and they're saying right here that in 1958 that this was really set up officially for that purpose, this secret, purpose that has national security implications and whatnot. And so it's very interesting timing when you say, okay, we have this crash that occurred in Roswell in the late 40s. For a while, they claim it may have gone to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio or something like that. But in that period of time, plans were made to create a facility which could be devoted to back engineering it and other things. And I believe that even though at what we call Area 51 today, they do lots of other things there, and probably 98% of the people who work there have never come into contact with an alien or a UFO or any of that. That is still a critical component of where the research and development begins over there. And who knows the little ways that it has been seeded into things like the stealth bomber and some of these other technologies that have come out since then, not to mention the fact You have books like the one from Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Corso, The Day After Roswell, where he, this very decorated man, is claiming that a lot of the technology was being seeded into corporations to create lasers, fiber optics, microchips, et cetera, et cetera. So
Here's the thing is, I know skeptics as friends. When you're in this industry, you obviously have to know what they're doing too. I always bring on Robert Schaefer, either on as a debate, and even Michael Shermer. He hasn't come on yet. We've talked off air, and of course to them it's all baloney. But when you're about to die and you're at your final years, are you really going to come up with some bullshit lie? No. Why would you? Why the hell would you leave this plane with a lie? You're going to tell the damn truth. That's why I've always believed Philip Corso.
and the same can be said for Senator Harry Reid. I mean, again, the guy, he's an old man. He has pancreatic cancer, for God's sake.
Geez,
I mean, he came out when he was first diagnosed, and he said, when you hear that, that's a death sentence. So, and this is a guy who served his whole life and who just seems to be like an ordinary, plain vanilla politician. But, here he is at the end of his life, and he's going to screw up his whole reputation by promoting UFOs and aliens and all this. No, I mean, you just have to look at this realistically and say, yeah, there are people who they understand. No matter how much money I have, it's not going to do any good when I take my final breath and slip away. So let me make use of the time that I do have here and try to contribute something that's beneficial. And so that's why I hope that anybody who's listening with the government or a subcontracted company with the government that has access to this information will just think about what I'm saying here, okay? I don't promote whistleblowers. I don't promote people breaking laws or doing things that would jeopardize projects. But when it comes to how you view what the American people, and for that matter, what the people of the world should know and eventually will know, you have to think, what side of history do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side of history that was trying to do the right thing and help us out and give us a little more transparency and a little more knowledge and wisdom that we can use to guide our lives? Or do you want to be known as one of those people who was involved in this futile conspiracy to try to keep us ignorant?
Yes, and you know what? It's the way we're kept ignorant is there's so many ways. Throw us with so many new consumer, iPhones and this and that. Our minds are kept so much more busy than 100 years ago, and it's so easy to distract us from what's really going on.
Well, that's right, and what's funny is that you'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd think that it would. To me, it reminds me of analyzing paranormal images. People send me images of ghosts or UFOs or cryptids every day, and they ask me to analyze them. And it's gotten harder and harder every year because I started studying film and filmmaking when I was just a kid. I mean, I got a medium format camera and a 16 millimeter motion picture camera, and I would go out and shoot things and develop them, and then I would go and I actually had a physical editing booth where I would have to cut stuff and splice it together, and I understood more at that point about the effort it would take to fake something. Now we've gotten to the point where the good news is we have cameras everywhere. I'm getting contacted
everywhere. Yes.
And they're showing me images that are wonderful. They come from baby monitors, they come from security cams, they come from just every. But at the same time, any one of us can pick up your cell phone and find a whole series of apps out there. Hey, prank your friends for fun. You can hit this button. Let's insert this ghost or this UFO or what.
I'm sure you know about deep fakes, right? Deep fake videos.
I have seen so many apps come out that are trying to fake things. I can't keep up with them. What is deep fake? Deep
fakes are probably the most concerning. What they need is 5 to 15 seconds of someone talking. Say the president or Vladimir Putin. And you just sit in the position and or even just speak, and then they will use your, basically whatever you do, even movements will be mimicked on this. I mean, if anyone, I'm sure people have started to see this because it started to trickle down finally to be to consumer level. Before, I guess apparently it used to cost hundreds of thousands. Now someone can deepfake a video of President Trump being super angry, saying that he just launched nuclear weapons that are headed to North Korea, to Iran, to China, and Russia at the same time. And by the way, we have a new technology that they're stealth, so none of the radars are picking them up. Now, if I was Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong Un or anybody like that, I'd be shitting my pants. I mean, that's how scary these deepfake videos are.
Oh, well, that's the thing. There is an irresponsibility there that people are not considering. And I understand that maybe that doesn't mean you should make that illegal. I mean, you get into a tricky area, but still, I mean, it's like when these people who put apps out there, fool your friends, insert a UFO or insert a ghost or what, they think this is just a joke. And the thing is, to me, and I got presuming to you and me, I mean, this is not necessarily a joke. I mean, I understand that you can have fun with it, but
you absolutely can. Don't get me wrong. I'm with you. It should be free. I mean, we are on a land. That's why we were so happy to be Americans. That because we are the land of the free. That's the fucking whole reason. Me and you are, we're born here. We're patriots here. Even though, yes, I know for all the listeners are gonna say, what about Greece? Yeah, that's where my parents came from. I didn't learn to speak English till I was 4, but that's a different story. I was born here. The point is we are the land of the free. We want there to be no censorship. Unfortunately, it exists in many places, but that's what we don't want. We're supposed to be allowed to see what we're paying for as far as taxes, what's the result. But at the same time, the one thing that I've noticed, Joshua, and maybe you can even confirm this, is when I visited other countries, they have a sense of responsibility that we don't seem to have. And it's a scary, scary thing. I'm not trying to knock every American, but I notice that far more in this country than there. I mean, when I say there, I mean like Sweden or UK or Paris. It's just a whole different thing as far as, you don't have to, I'll give you an example. 2004, I was there, a girl I was dating in college, she went to study abroad. I went to visit her, and we went to go on those pedal boats in the canals in Amsterdam. And if you had gone that anywhere in the U.S., say Lake Mead where you are, if they have pedal boats, they're going to make you wear a helmet, wear a life vest. You're going to have to sign all sorts of forms, indemnify them. You're taking responsibility, this and that. We paid. The guy just handed us, or just told us which boat and said, I'll see you in an hour. I mean, and we're in the canals, and we're literally dodging like fishing boats. And when I was in the UK, there's a lot of people walking near the tube and etc. When two people are walking towards each other, and there's a crowd of people in that walkway, a lot of people just, without thinking, instead of just going around, they'll stop and they'll face each other. Then they'll each take a step, say to the right of one person, to the left of the other. And it's like I sense that we need to be more responsible completely.
Well, that's true. And when it comes especially to something like paranormal investigation anymore, if I'm going to go to some spot like Brown Mountain where people see the Brown Mountain lights, or I'm going to go out and do some UFO skywatch, I do everything I can to keep either the location and or the time and location a secret. Because at, say, Brown Mountain, there are people, and I've encountered them over the years, who if they know that you're going to be out there with a bunch of gear and cameras and you're going to be observing Brown Mountain, they'll get out there and they will have flashlights and they'll have Chinese lanterns and they'll have, because it's a big joke to them to just put that stuff up there and try to mess with you. And I'm thinking to myself, there is a real phenomenon here that I'm trying to learn about. Why would you just go out and try to screw with me like that when, that's one of the reasons that my team and I developed the opticalizer. So you don't waste time looking at something that might just be some flashlight or some drone when you can look at it and the computer says, yep, here's what that is. And so it's unfortunate that I have to do that, but I've been getting a lot of media attention here in Vegas since the Storm Area 51 deal started, where news media, and I'm talking international media, TV stations all over the country,
Japan and Europe and all that.
Yeah, all over the place. They come here and they want to go out into the field with me and my team and see us trying to document a UFO. And I tell them, all right, you have to meet me at this location and then follow me to a secret location. I won't even tell the media where my actual location is going to be.
Well, if you told them, they'd ruin it.
Well, you can't. I mean, if you get something that's amazing, you want to be able to say, look, we have done everything in our power to keep this as pure as possible. So, I may not be able to tell you 100% this or that, but what I can tell you is that we did everything we could to keep this location a secret so that dramatically reduces the possibility that somebody would have tried to get out here and mess around with us. And so that is one of the challenges that you have when you do this research. Also, when people ask me to analyze footage, there's only so much that I can tell at face value these days. I mean, especially if I've only got one point of view, one perspective. I love to, if you're going to send me something, like, I want to talk to the person who shot this. I want to have that person say, I shot this. Here is when I did it. Here is where I did it. Here's what the weather was like. Here's who I was with. This is the type of camera I was using. And I want to at least start there with somebody standing up and saying, I put my hand on this Bible or whatever. I did it. Okay, fine. So now we can start taking this a little bit more seriously, because it's too easy to just make up some crap and just toss it out there on the internet and then wait to see if a guy like me is, a dumbass who's going to come out here and take the bait, right?
Yeah, of course. That's what they think they can get one over you.
Yeah, and so I have to be careful these days, especially when you have media that sends me something and asks me to analyze it. I had a major international newspaper contact me the other day, and the piece is going to be coming out in a few days, so I don't want to say what it is until it comes out. But they sent me some footage to analyze, and I thought, man, I better be very careful with this, because if I say I think this may be something and it turns out it was a blatant fake, well, then there goes my credibility in this arena. So I have to be more careful than ever. And so that goes back to, I guess, the whole point of what we're discussing right now. The good news is we have got the potential to gather more information than ever and use it wisely, but we equally have the potential to just abuse it and use it flippantly. And so what kind of human nature are we expressing here? What direction are we going to go with this? I mean, how much decency do people have, and how much do they understand the challenge of exploration and discovery when you're trying to analyze and find something new that might be beneficial to humankind in some way?
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things is how's it going to be beneficial to us,
Well, let's take, for example, the Brown Mountain Lights.
Yes.
So the Brown Mountain Lights, for those who don't know exactly.
State? Yeah, exactly. Where are they?
Okay, so this is in western North Carolina. I mentioned that I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. You drive, that's in the mountains. And so if you drive about an hour east of that, you hit the Pisgah National Forest. And there you have an area they call the L.E.M.U.R area. It's absolutely beautiful, breathtaking. There's a L.E.M.U.R Gorge there. It's kind of like a little Grand Canyon. And right next to it is this long, low-lying ridge called Brown Mountain. And for over 100 years, according to journalistic accounts, and maybe for hundreds of years, based upon some of the Native American legends and folklore, people have been seeing these multicolored balls of light floating on and around this ridge at night. They've been studied numerous times by scientists. No one knows what they are. And so I have gone there for years and gotten permits from the Forest Service and camped up there and tried to figure out what these lights may be. And as a matter of fact, I wrote a whole booklet about this, which you can download for free as a PDF. If you go to my Twitter account at Joshua P. Warren, you'll see I just posted it today because I just finished doing a TV program about Brown Mountain that's coming out soon on the Travel Channel, and you can just download that and you can read it for yourself, and see pictures and everything. But anyway, so the thing is, when you look at these lights and you take measurements with instruments, and I've taken physicists up there and astronomers and forest rangers and historians, my feeling is that this is some type of a natural phenomenon that's very similar to ball lightning, that's produced by the way the mountain is releasing energy and the way that certain cliffs are interacting with each other and the environment. And in 2004, my team and I made the cover of a science journal called Electric Spacecraft by reproducing a similar phenomenon in the laboratory. Now, the point of this is, if indeed I can look at something that Mother Nature has created, which people have called ghosts or UFOs or portals or whatever, and I can learn about how Mother Nature creates such an amazing thing, and then recreate that on a smaller scale, well, now this could give us enormous insight in how we can tap into plasmas and similar seemingly independent balls of energy for propulsion, for communication, for non-lethal weaponry. There's a whole long list of practical applications that we might be able to enhance by taking something that's natural and learning from it.
So Earth's powers, you're talking like Earth's powers, right?
Earth lights and that sort of thing. So you see, this is just one blatant example of how studying what may now be called the paranormal could actually have very practical benefits. Because all that paranormal means is we're talking about something that's on the fringes of knowledge, on the fringes of what we've been able to scientifically document. And so if you have an intelligent paranormal investigator who approaches this the right way, comprehensively, uses the scientific method, takes this seriously with an open mind, well, then we are going to have the most profound new discoveries that come from the paranormal frontier. And so when you have people who are out there screwing with your research, they're not understanding how they are really creating what could be a huge problem for their own benefit and their own future, Stupid.
Now, let me ask you about this. Is one thing I love about you is how not only are you so well kept up on the news and you're such a brilliant person when you have a team and you actually do truly investigate and come across some of the best evidence, but you also don't just hesitate, or you don't, not hesitate is the wrong word, you don't stay on one topic, meaning UFOs only, right? You go into ghosts and other things like that. When you say paranormal, that's the umbrella for all of that. And linking them is the key. A lot of people don't do that. And I think there's so much that crosses over between each of those paranormal things that makes each one connected. What do you say about that?
I could not agree more. In fact, I am one of the few people in the world who has not allowed himself to be pigeonholed into one area or another, because I'm interviewed quite often in a number of different regards, and it's common for somebody to get pigeonholed. Well, you're the UFO guy, you're the Bigfoot guy, you're the magic guy, whatever. But people who have interviewed me and stuck with me and done research with me over the years have realized that what I really am is a person who is fascinated by the relationship between matter and energy, and what the limits of that may or may not be. And that's why I like to take things in nature and adapt them to lab experiments and try to put them in a more controlled scenario, because it seems to me that if this is a universe, then everything must be unified in some way. And yet you talk to scientists who say, well, right now we have these, 4 fundamental forces of nature. Well, then we're missing something. Because there ought to just be one fundamental force of nature. And so that means when you are sort of investigating different manifestations of what people consider the paranormal. It reminds me of that great quote by Charles Fort, "You can measure a circle beginning anywhere." So if you're a person who's studying matter and energy, you can get involved from a lot of different points of view. I got involved mainly from ghosts, or you might get involved through UFOs, or you might get involved through psychic phenomena. But if you get involved through any of those avenues, and you stick with this long enough, then eventually you will start to realize how that ghosts tie into UFOs, and UFOs tie into cryptids, and all that stuff ties into angels and demons, and all that stuff ties into psychic phenomena, and all that stuff ties into consciousness and magic and manifestation. And that ultimately, the one thing that completely unifies it all that we have to agree upon is that all of this is processed at the end of the day through the human nervous system. So that's why you have people who try to fool themselves into saying, I'm an objective scientist, or I'm an objective skeptic, or whatever, and they're relying maybe on, if not something they consider subjective, then some piece of equipment. But the problem is the piece of equipment was envisioned by a human, built by a human, calibrated by a human, used by a human, interpreted by a human. You cannot remove the human element. And if you consider the people that we ultimately have to hold up to the highest standards, the people we think are the smartest out there, we usually think have to be the medical doctors, because they're the ones that are going to keep you alive, right? Or they're the ones who are going to keep your loved ones alive. And yet the history of medicine is so replete with astonishing failures. I mean, President George Washington was bled to death. You know, they took 6 beer glasses full of blood out of him when he was lying there at his weakest. And they weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to save him. They wanted to get that bad blood out of there. They took at least 6 beer glasses, and he died.
Christ. Yeah.
I mean, you had, in the 1940s and 50s, you can get on YouTube and watch these commercials where doctors are promoting cigarettes.
Yes.
What kind of brand
Oh,
do you
yes.
smoke?
Doctors would tell you it's good for your nerves. It keeps you calm. There's no bad effect, but it's a good thing. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, okay, look at lobotomies. People don't, they don't think about that. For over 20 years, thousands and thousands of lobotomies were performed. And some of them, they would, if they didn't cut your head right open and cut up your brain, they'd take an ice pick and hammer it through the corners of your eyes, smash out the little back thin layer of the skull, and then just kind of move that pick back and forth and kind of grind your brain up in there. And do you know that one of the leading proponents of lobotomies in this country, his mentor was nominated for a Nobel Prize in medicine for his work discovering lobotomies, and won it. Won the Nobel Prize for lobotomizing people. So the point is, there's going to come a day in the future when people look back at those of us who are living here in 2019 and say, my God, can you believe those dumbasses believed that shit? And so we have got to start opening our minds a little bit and learning from history, learning about the context that we have technologically, and consider that, hey, there is so much to learn. We're just getting little glimpses of it here and there. And the quote-unquote mainstream scientists who are worried about their reputation, who don't want to risk their tenure, who don't want to rock the boat, they're not the ones that are necessarily always going to take that leap. It's people who are doing paranormal investigation who realize all this is part of a huge system of singular mystery, and you can look at it from different, points of view, but realize we don't know everything, and it's the people who take the risks, who focus on those little areas that are thought to be crazy or whatever, who can lead us to the newest, greatest achievements. And so that's why I think you have to look at everything and see it's just only divided from the human perspective.
That's absolutely true. And speaking about history, it's that saying, if we don't know our history, we're all doomed to repeat it. And that is so true. And yet we keep fucking up. time over time over time again. You're right. There will be a time down the line where they're going to look back at us in these years and realize, oh shit, we were really doing the wrong stuff and fucking up completely. And the other point you made is that we absolutely have to take a chance on those people who society it doesn't consider mainstream. Look at Nikola Tesla. How different would the world be right now had he surpassed Edison, had the funding and everything? And what's in those documents that the FBI seized? What kind what kind of information? And it's we denied his alternating current at the time for the direct current. So yeah, you're absolutely right that the human perspective has to change. And now, and that happens to be also today. I think we lost Nikola Tesla in time, and a lot of what he wrote and the science he did is gone. That we'll never see. It's probably locked in some vault in Edgar building somewhere. But we got Elon Musk. I had Nassim on recently, Nassim Harriman. He's really doing a lot in quantum physics that other people are not. And that's what it takes. It takes people, and like yourself, you're. This is what's gonna happen, Joshua. Once shit hits the fan and aliens are just, it's a fact. Everybody knows them. No one questions them. Who do you think they're gonna come to? They're gonna come to you. They're gonna say, hey, what do we share food with them, or do we look them in the eye? Should we shake hands with them? They're gonna say all that shit. They're gonna be asking you the questions because that's not what mainstream is doing right now.
Well, that is a good question because I've often felt like I'm not a big proponent of the idea. For example, this is just an easy example that Bigfoot is some kind of a normal biological organism, because I see how much it takes for a gorilla to live for a day, and I think if we had an 8-foot tall, 1,200 pound ape running around in every state in the United States, we'd have a lot more evidence for it if this thing is an ordinary biological organism. But that's why I think it's kind of more of an interdimensional or phantasmal thing. That said, if tomorrow one of these cryptozoologist guys who's been out there camping out every night for the past 30 years actually does get a dead Bigfoot, and sure enough, it turns out to be a normal biological, just a big-ass ape that was somehow hiding all this time, I wonder if at that point, suddenly, all of the scientists who are biologists and zoologists at major universities, if they would swoop in and say, okay, we'll take it from here, boys. Thank you very much, but go fuck off. And they would take the Bigfoot and they would load it up, and then suddenly nobody would even remember the guy who's been out there, camping out and sniffing piles of shit and everything for 30 years. And it would just end up being something that the academia would try to take credit for. So it could go either way. So I'm not sure if aliens came out tomorrow or if ghosts were proven, that people would look at me and say, oh, wow, you were the guy who was onto this all along. It could go the other direction. They could just say, all right, he's done the hard work, so that could be the curse of always being on the fringe. As soon as you're proven right, then people kind of forget about it.
No, let me ask you about this. Okay, you talked about Bigfoot, and I don't think those people are lying. I've had some of the world's leading experts on that, and one of them, I'm blanking on his name. I'd have to look it up when he had him on. The point is he is, I think, an anthropologist, and they consider him the guy as far as Bigfoot right now. And he, as far as footage, he believes only the Patterson film, right? And now, so that, and there's so many other cryptid creatures that I think that could slip in and out of dimensions and stuff like that. Because if they were just living in our forests, which by the way are very vast, right now, as you mentioned earlier, how everything is being filmed, and that's a fact beyond a doubt. Everything is being filmed. So wouldn't we see more of it? More tracks, more maybe feces, more just more of them in general. You see them one at a time. You don't see an old one and a young one. So I truly think some of those cryptids may be just on a different plane and are for whatever reason maybe in that area. I don't know. I don't have the answers to Bigfoot. But I was going to segue from Bigfoot into other cryptids, but specifically this is something that is may not even be cryptid, but it's definitely very rare and it's scary. Is the Men in Black? Somebody who has done a lot of analysis on this, Justin Banforth, gave me four recordings, audio recordings of what are purported to be Men in Black, and I don't know if you've heard them or not, but that shit's pretty freaky, and the whole aspect of them. I know you know that Seattle case, right? The hotel case, right?
No, I don't know that one. What happened?
It's the one that you see the famous footage of the two guys, the two men in black coming in. What they do is apparently the manager and somebody else saw a UFO outside the day before, a couple weeks before. Then that place, the day they happen to be off, these two men in black are caught on film walking in. And they asked a couple people some questions, and they looked around, and people said that they looked like they were either they're very pale, they didn't have eyebrows or any hair at all. They even looked like their hair on their head was wigs, like maybe even glued to their hats. And they said they got the weirdest feeling that they were speaking, that they could read their mind. And I was like, holy shit, and we got them on camera. But here's the crazier part, is the parking attendant had no fucking idea what kind of car it was. None. And you think a guy who drives, parks cars for a living is pretty familiar with every car, all the way up to, Rolls Royces and $2 million Mercedes and Lamborghinis, etc. But he had no idea what this was. And the other thing is even though they caught him on, surveillance footage coming in, they didn't catch him on anything else, and no one remembers them leaving, and it wasn't on film either.
Well, Timothy Green Beckley, and you've probably interviewed him, he has a really eerie photograph of a man in black that he took in the 1960s in New York. And it was a similar situation where some people had been seeing a UFO and talking about it, and then this creepy man in black started sort of following them around. And so Tim and one of his buddies, I think his friend was an editor, they waited around, and sure enough, they got a picture of this man in black. If you get online, just type in Tim Beckley and Man in Black or Men in Black, you'll probably see this picture. But here's my thought on the Men in Black, and this can get really complex, so I'm going to try to condense this as much as possible. On my website, joshuapwarren.com, I have a curiosity shop. And some of my books are available as ebooks, and one of them is called The Secret Wisdom of Kukulkan. And you can just download it. It costs like $9.95. It's no big deal. In this book, I proposed what I call the paratemporal loop hypothesis. And here's the gist of it. So the hypothesis is based on if ever, in all of the future, some species is going to figure out how to travel back in time, then that species will eventually do it. Okay, that's the crux of the hypothesis. They will do it. And if it can be done by one, then that means it can be done by others. And so that means we probably have many different species from the future that are traveling back to the past. And so, therefore, when these species come back to the past, what they're probably doing is adjusting the past in some way to make the future a bit more beneficial for that particular species. And so what we may end up with are loops within loops within loops of future beings coming back here and manipulating the reality that we experience on a day-by-day basis, which is why we may have stuff like the Mandela effect or what I used to call the dead celebrities phenomenon. One day a celebrity's dead, the next day he's alive. It may be that one day Bigfoot is real. Maybe it could be 1 minute Bigfoot's real, and the next minute Bigfoot is not real anymore. Maybe one day there's a flying saucer, there, and then an hour later the flying saucer's not there, and then it comes back again. And
Well, yeah,
sometimes
speaking of what you just said about the flying saucer going there and coming back, we know that there are several incidents. For instance, they'll be in the exact same place and they'll just be gone and show up a year later, and then be gone and show up a year later again.
yeah, just boom, just it's like somebody hit the switch, and so if this is going on, well, eventually somebody probably is going to try to police this,
Hmm.
to police the timelines, and so therefore, it could be that what we call the Men in Black are beings that are policing this process, but they have to change the way they dress in order to fit in to the time period that they're going to be working in. So let's say, for example, one of the Men in Black, he gets up to go to work at 8 o'clock in the afternoon. And he's like, okay, it's 20th Century Day, so I'm going to start in 1910 at 9 o'clock, and then by lunchtime I'm going to be in 1950, and then 2 o'clock I'm going to be in 1990, and then close to 5 o'clock I'm going to be in 1934. He doesn't want to have to be changing clothes all damn day. So he tries to pick out an outfit, which is going to be the outfit which would be most suitable over the largest span of time. And in the 20th century, it's like black coat, black pants, black hat. You can kind of move around the whole 20th century, and you might look a little bit weirder as we get closer to the year 2000, but still, I walk around all the time with the black suit and a black hat, and nobody gives a shit. So it could be that these Men in Black, for convenience, because you wonder, like, why do they dress this way? Why do they drive this kind of a car? What clue does that give us about who they are and what they're doing? It may be that you could go back through every different era in human history, figure out the one outfit that would be most suitable for the individuals who want to bounce around that era, and use that to figure out who the Men in Black were at that time. Because there are all kinds of stories throughout history about these weird, awkward people who pop up on these special occasions and then just kind of disappear. And for example, there's a story about how that when the founders of this country were sitting around in Philadelphia debating whether or not to sign the Declaration of Independence, which was basically a death sentence for themselves, that suddenly, even though the door was locked, some strange man appeared, came up, gave this fantastic oration, fired everybody up, and then disappeared. And nobody knows to this day who he was, how he got into the building and out of the building. But that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and they said, screw it, and they all signed the thing. So it could be that the Men in Black are people who are trying to influence the progression of time without going overboard, without being overt, without screwing things up Back to the Future style, without creating the grandfather paradox. But when we see them, they pop up and they look a little weird because they're not one of us. They're not dressed quite like one of us, but close enough. And so they just do enough to kind of get in and out and get the job done. And that is one theory that I dig into more in The Secret Wisdom of Kukulkan, again, at joshuapwarren.com.
That's actually really amazing that you said that, because from hearing from people who I've had on that reported to have been time travelers, whether they're to believe it or not, I have no proof of that, but I let them tell their stories. Is the main thing is one thing that they get across is that independently they all call it the Time Authority. That is who is policing, time travel, just like you said, to not create those other different, branches off the tree, right? The tree that would be time. Each branch would may cause a catastrophe. There have been lots of movies about this, Back to the Future just being one thing, but specifically even like cartoons and something. I mean, Simpsons did an episode where, Homer kept going back in time, and whether it was swatting a fly on dinosaurs, it was a whole different life he lived, etc. So you're absolutely right, and that was really interesting that you mentioned that theory, because the only other theory I've heard about the Men in Black is that they are possibly ETs. Or ETs even wearing humans as clothing, their skin, or just some sort of weird human that knows that operates very covertly, has powers that we don't, such as telepathy, and definitely has access to technology that we don't.
Well, it could be a combination of both, especially if again, it's funny because when you sit around and you talk to scientists and they say, "Well, here's what happened 35 million years ago," it's like, hey, there's no way that we have any idea really what happened 35 million years ago. I mean, that you can't comprehend that. And so when you start looking at the infinity, which is the future, and we're talking about millions of years, maybe even billions of years into the future, we can't comprehend what kinds of beings may arise. The beings that are coming back here and possibly manipulating the timelines may not even exist yet. I mean, these may be beings that are not going to exist for millions of years, and they have to evolve from their own primordial ooze. But if time's infinite, eventually they get to the point where they're coming back here, and they're kind of fitting in. And don't you think it's interesting when you watch these nature programs, and you see scientists who go out there and they dress up like a deer or something, and they clumsily walk around so that they can sneak up on some animal and get a picture, or give them
Hmm.
some kind of like medication or some kind of shit. I mean, like, you think to yourself,
Tranquilizer,
we do
even
that.
something up close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do that as humans, so why should we think that sometimes these other beings won't put on some clunky human suit and come out here and try to do something crazy to us, you know?
It's ironic you said that. There's a film. I'm supposed Okay, I was screened it. Maybe you were screened it too. It's called Extraordinary: The Seeding, and it's basically part two of the Extraordinary Stan Romanek story, but it doesn't have Stan Romanek in it. And what these people are talking about is that some of what they see is like what would be a perfectly amazing, beautiful woman. I mean, like beyond perfect. And yet there would be like a rip in a space of time fabric, like say on her face, on her cheek area, and it would reveal that underneath was, reptilian. And the question is if that's, and that was, multiple people have said that. The question is if that's true, and then is that just a glitch in the matrix or whatever it is? Or, here's the better idea, or are they doing that on purpose to show us, look, we're dressed as humans to not scare you, but this is what we really are inside?
Well, that's a very good and interesting point because it probably has something to do with how freaked out the person is. And I'll tell you, this is something that I don't talk about too much because I am an extremely vivid dreamer. I've been that way my whole life,
Hmm.
and I have lucid dreams all the time. And sometimes I have dreams that seem so real that I wake up and I question whether or not that I imagined that somehow or if I actually went out of body and experienced something. But I had this extremely realistic experience one time that this was years ago that I traveled out of my body and I went up into the sky and I was in some kind of a gigantic ship. I can describe exactly what it looked like. And so I felt like, okay, I'm basically being abducted here. And so I went into this room and this voice said to me, I would like to talk to you, but I do not want to frighten you. How would you like for me to appear? Okay, ask me that.
Interesting. That's how I personally, because I have a fear if I just say I was watching TV at 3, 4 in the morning, whatever time it is, 2, 1, what depending whatever night it was before I went to sleep, and all of a sudden through the door I saw a gray head. I would shit my pants. I'm not joking. I mean, I don't think that really literally happened, but that's the fear I have of meeting something that is bizarre, a reptilian, a gray, etc. However, if I was contacted via telepathy and told, "What do you want us to appear as?" and we'll come, then I would be so happy that they did that. First of all, if they asked me, and so happy that I can choose something as innocent as maybe even a deer or whatever, and that's what they would come to me as. That's what I would prefer to be the best way of personal contact.
Well, I tell you what I said. I said, I would like a woman with long blonde hair in a bikini.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what I got. And so the woman came, and now you might say, well, why would he say that? Well, why not? I mean, that's something that I have a gentle connection to that. So she sat down, and I had this conversation with her. And basically, what she said was that, and so, going back to what you were saying about the women, how like maybe some people talk about seeing a woman, but the
Perfect,
little,
sexy
you know,
woman. Yeah.
yeah. And so I basically what they said was this world is going to go through some big changes, and we need somebody to help others understand what's happening so that they're not frightened. We don't want people to be frightened. And so we are going to help you if you want to help us explain to other people what's happening. And I said, well, okay, sure, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And they said, now, you have two options. Option number one is you can come with us right now. But if you do that, then your physical body is going to die. Or we can send you back and you can, help us spread this information. And I was very tempted to be like Richard Dreyfuss at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind and say, oh, take me with you, But then I thought about just like my wife coming home and finding me dead there in bed or whatever. So I was like, now, I still have more cool stuff to do back on Earth. I know I'm going to die someday. There's no need to jump the gun on that. So they said, okay, we're going to be, seeing you again. And then they sent me back, and then I woke up, and I have no idea if that was just a super realistic dream or if I was astrally, taken somewhere else. But I can, just using that as an example, whatever it was, I can see why that sometimes these beings might have enough care for you to ask you, like, how am I going to appear in a way that's not going to freak you out or make you feel threatened or whatever? And frankly, even if I'd picked like a deer or a bunny rabbit or something, that would still kind of been freaky to have a little bunny rabbit sitting there having a conversation. That's like something out of South Park, So I think I made the right decision.
There's a question for you that I meant to ask you. That's from a listener here. It's almost 5 minutes old, but let's get to it. This is from Nicholas Cashmore, and I'm gonna read it word for word. How is it possible for a human's eye to turn iris when angry? And the second message is iris turns yellow.
Well, I obviously that immediately reminds me of some of David Icke's type of work regarding the reptilian matrix, and here's what I can tell you. Okay, I have certainly seen someone's demeanor change in a way that makes that person look different. Their eyes literally change colors. People talked about Ted Bundy, for example, how when he's being Mr. Nice Guy, his eyes are all nice and bright, and then all of a sudden they turn black. And when he's pissed off and all this rage comes out. And what's intriguing is to understand that all humans really are shapeshifters. And you might say, huh? Well, let me explain. We just usually call it aging, all right, because it happens slowly. So think of how you were when you were a little baby. You didn't look like you look right now, and you look different than you're going to look in 20, 30 years. So you are a shapeshifter. They claim that, parts of your body even recycle every 7 days or whatever. So therefore, shapeshifting is just a part of life. The question becomes, can you shapeshift very, very quickly? And if so, does that mean you're shapeshifting because that you are changing yourself, or are you looking at some type of a being that's tapped into a different genetic code that is able to, like a chameleon, switch back and forth? And that's more of the David Icke kind of thinking on this, that we're all part of a program, and that some people are hiding their true nature, and that they are able to, show you their true nature, and you get little glimpses of their reptilian side coming out. Look, the thing is, I cannot tell you that I have honestly ever looked at a human. Well, let me put it this way: looked into the eyes of what I believe was a human, and see those eyes change like that. I've never personally seen that. I have talked to people who have said they have, and therefore,
Sure, you've seen the videos on YouTube about the stars who
yeah,
change, right?
yeah, I've seen that stuff, but
I
they're
don't give
videos.
credence. That's the problem with those. You don't
Yeah,
know. It's there's so much forgery.
yeah. So I would say, like, look, am I open to the possibility that there are beings among us who are disguising themselves? Of course. I mean, how many cows on planet Earth know that people eat cows? Probably not a single one. Not like there are lots of cows, but I bet you there's not one cow out there that realizes people eat cows. On the contrary, we look like we love them from the cow's point of view, because we show up, we feed them, and we water them, and we take care of them. Why would the cow think that we eat you? So I realize that you'd have to be pretty damn egotistical to think it's impossible for us to be surrounded by beings that are always what they seem to be. So it's possible that we have these reptilian types in disguise. It's possible that some people have an inner nature that expresses itself more dramatically when they're emotional. But nobody really knows, at least I don't really know for sure about how to properly interpret that, but I'm open to either possibility.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, is being open. That's one thing I always push, is having an open mind. What I always look for is patterns, right? If this person said this during this experience and that person said that, I'm sure you're going to see some variance, but a lot of it's patterns. That's what I usually like to think of as, as close to evidence as we can get. But like you mentioned earlier, we are living in very, very, very exciting times. I mean, the tree's just unraveling. We're young. We're not in our 80s. We don't have anything to worry like that. And I think me and you and a handful of us, compared to the billions of people in this world, are going to see and understand a lot more than what, say, the mainstream will, that just denies it all right now when stuff really starts hitting the fan.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, we are perfectly poised here, and that's why I think to myself, if the experience that I described to you was not a dream, if that actually was some type of astral experience, where some other intelligence was trying to speak to me and tell me this, well, I'd like to think I'm perfectly poised to do whatever I can. I'm in my 40s right now. I'm here in Las Vegas where all this is happening. I mean, this is the place to be right now for this UFO disclosure thing. Again, I'm sort of got my finger on the pulse of everything. I've got the Creepy Vegas Ghost and UFO show. So the next time you're in Vegas, you and everybody in your audience, you gotta look me up, man. Go to creepyvegas.com. Get your ticket to this thing. You get to touch haunted objects. You get to see debris from Roswell. You get to see amazing, authentic footage of ghosts and UFOs. And we do the whole thing at this cosplay pop culture bar called Millennium Fandom. And it's just people dress up, and it's fantastic. So hopefully people will come here and see me. But I want to implore everybody listening, if you want to send me a report about UFOs, or especially anything related to what's happening here in Storm Area 51, you can just email me through contact at creepyvegas.com, or just go to creepyvegas.com and check out the stuff we've got there.
You actually beat my next question, and we definitely should also plug in your website.
Thank you for saying that, because I have a lot of stuff going on. I have a lot of different projects. Of course, my name is Joshua P. Warren. So if you go to joshuapwarren.com, there's no period after the P. And at joshuapwarren.com, you'll find a link to my podcast called Joshua P. Warren Daily, which is always free. It's always short. It's commercial free. It's uncensored. It's independent. And I just kind of keep you updated on what I'm up to. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes it's 50 minutes. but I'm able to tell you sort of what's happening. And so you'll probably enjoy that. I know if you enjoy listening to Dr. J, you'll enjoy listening to Joshua P. Warren daily. So if you go there, yeah, check out the Curiosity Shop. You can learn about the wishing machine, something we can talk more about in the future, Dr. J, because I
Yeah,
know you had
yeah,
some
because I
success with
I
the
was
group.
just gonna say I totally apologize for not bringing that up, but if you could briefly talk about what it is, and all I can tell you, everybody, is it worked for me. This thing worked in days.
Well, if, you know, it's a very controversial experimental piece of technology that is intended to help merge mind and material. It's called the wishing machine, and if you go to joshuapwarren.com, you'll find a link to the wishing machine and other manifestation tools. There's a thing called the miraculous prayer board, which has really been like phenomenal. Some of the stuff that we're doing with that, and these are complicated subjects because they're mysteries. But I shoot videos to explain to you what they are. So watch the video there about the wishing machine. Watch the video about the miraculous prayer board. Click the link to Creepy Vegas. Go to the Joshua P. Warren Daily page. I mean, it's just like I'm constantly working on a lot of different things. And if you go there and you start clicking around, you're bound to find something that connects with you, but it's all about that mind body environment relationship, matter and energy. And there are some of us who kind of get it, and if you if you're listening to this show, you're one of those people who gets it. So Dr. J, I tell you, man, I so enjoy our conversations, and you've got to come to Vegas and do the Creepy Vegas Ghost and UFO show.
Oh, I absolutely will. And now that I can, I actually was planning on coming out there not too long ago to not only hang out with you, also I have a friend who's a magician there, and I would definitely love to see Chris Angel. But absolutely, I need to go out there because I need to visit Erin Bell. I promised her I'd come back after I lost my license. I got it back, but after I got it back, I promised her I would, and I have not. But you were already on top of my mind. I was gonna go on a trip with you to see some of these areas that have this anomaly for sure. And now with your show, I'm really excited about seeing that show. I know Paper Crane wishes she goes to Vegas. I hope she goes there and checks it out, and everybody for that matter listening goes. Definitely go. And again, all information can be found on Joshua P. Warren. Joshua, thank you so much. I'm so sorry we didn't get to cover all this, but me and you can talk for days on end, and we know there's going to be so much more to talk about. That's what I love talking to you with. Hang on for a bit, and I want to talk to you off air, and thank you again off air. Let me just give a shout out to everybody in the chat room. I want to thank you all. I definitely want to thank those of you who gave super chat, including Nicholas Cashmore, Justin T, Rockstar, Paper Crane Wishes, and Betsy Richardson. And everybody, thank you for your support. It's been brought up to get me on Joe Rogan. Well, you know what? His studio is 5 miles away. I could walk there if I needed to. But it's not going to have to come from me. It's going to have to come from you, the listener. Go to his website, JRE Contact, whatever it is. Just search JRE, Joe Rogan Experience. And you'll find his website. There's a suggestion page. Write your message and suggest if that's what you want me to do. And if you want me to continue to bring you these shows with amazing, amazing guests, top of the line like Joshua P. Warren, then I do need all your help with support. And just like I called it the other day with this U.S. Secret Service agent that was on, if we went down the path of the certain date and that will currently live in infamy, then I would be demonetized. And I was, of course, that video. And that's unfortunately the way, because yes, we are on the biggest network in the world, which is YouTube. We are unfortunately under their rules of censorship. So with that being said, remember everything social media wise is at DRG Radio Live. The only thing I pay attention to is, of course, my Twitter. That's the only thing, and that tag me there, and you'll find me there, unless you get a hold of my phone number. But you need to text me. It's you, otherwise I won't get back to you because 95% of calls are BS. Also, check out the new website. It is Tommy Shutter. He is the best webmaster I've known in 22 years of having websites. He actually is the one who built the original site about 5 years ago and now has done more than just a facelift. I'd love to get all your opinions on that, so please do. And with that being said, keep your eyes in the sky. Remember, this is about bringing intelligence to this discussion, and please have an open mind. If you know somebody that is interested, or if you guys are going to be in Vegas, check out make sure you bring that interested party to Mr. Warren's show. That way they could be exposed to this, because that's what it's going to take. I truly believe it's not, we're not going to get anywhere by waiting for the elected, or even unelected sometimes, across the world, to make this disclosure and contact with us publicly. It's going to take each and every one of you all. With that being said, you all rock. God bless you all. You have a great night. Love you all. And I will be on tomorrow night.